गुड मॉर्निंग स्टुडंट्स. आज आपण गुगल मीटवर प्रयत्न केला. गुगल मीटवर काही बरीचशी मुलं जॉईन होत नाही, तर त्यामुळे हे लेक्चर मी परत बनवत आहे. वी हॅव सीन द डिफरंट फीचर्स ऑफ पोएट्री ॲज ए फॉर्म ऑफ लिटरेचर. We have also seen the different definitions of poetry and the kinds of poetry, just as narrative poetry, reflective poetry, lyrical poetry, sonnet, ode, elegy, ballad. These are the different types of poems. Poems and poetry are interrelated terms. Poetry and poems म्हणजे कविताच. So we are going to begin with the poem that is prescribed for our study, and that poem is a very famous poem by Robert Frost, an American poet. Now, Robert Frost was an American poet. He was born in 1874 and died in 1963. That is his lifespan. As we say that poetry is an art of imagination, and it exposes the emotions and feelings of the poet, as well as the experiences of the poet. This Robert Frost was a poet who is very famous poet as a poet of rural life, country life. He is also called the poet of the peasantry. म्हणजे शेतकरी ग्रामीण जीवनातले ज्या काही विषय ते सगळे या कवीनं आपल्या कवितेद्वारे मांडलेले आहेत. He not only discusses the rural subjects or the subjects of the countryside, but he has tried to provide the philosophy through those poems. And here we say that he began his career as a poet. He published his earlier poetry in England. And Robert Frost was the first poet who had won Pulitzer Prizes for poetry 4 times. Pulitzer Prize for poetry and 4 times. Because of his poetry and because of his different kinds of thoughts provoked throughout the poetry, he became a public literary figure in America and all over the world. He was also a poet laureate of Vermont. Now this is his general introduction. If we look at the personal life of Robert Frost, it was full of grief and loss, because he has lost his father when he was 11. Then he lost his mother. He had 6 children, but most of 4 children were died at their early age. So his life was full of depression, alienation, and loneliness. And that is why we see that he has presented the different contradictions in life and humanity at large. The present poem, The Mending Wall. The title of the present poem is The Mending Wall. We are going to see just the introduction for this poem, Mending Wall. His poems are symbolic. When we hear or talk about Robert Frost, we quickly remember his famous lines that woods are dark, deep, and lovely, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. या रॉबर्ट फ्रॉस्टच्या फेमस लाईन्स आहेत. याशिवाय या कवितेमधील गुड फेन्सेस मेक गुड नेबर्स हे स्लोगन टाइप सेंटेन्स जे आहे इट बिकम्स वर्ल्ड फेमस. गुड फेन्सेस मेक गुड नेबर्स. हिज पोएम्स आर सिंबॉलिक and suggestive. Even the present poem, Mending Wall, wall is a symbolic word. It suggests more than our expectations. Actually, wall म्हणजे काय? भिंत. वॉल म्हणजे भिंत. रवींद्रनाथ टागोरांची एक कविता आहे, प्रार्थना आहे, हेवन ऑफ फ्रीडम नावाची. त्या हेवन ऑफ फ्रीडम मध्ये टागोर काय म्हणतात की फेअर द माइंड इज विदाउट फिअर अँड द हेड इज हेल्ड हाय. Where the knowledge is free, and where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. तिथेही वॉल हा शब्द वापरलेला आहे. वॉल म्हणजे काय की द डिव्हिजन ऑफ सोसायटी इनटू डिफरंट कास्ट्स, क्रीड्स, रिलिजन्स. Means the wall is a symbolic word here. At the surface level, it seems that the poem is about the procedure or the process of mending wall. That is, wall is a boundary. शेतात आपण पाहतो आपल्या शेताला बांध असतो आणि तो बांध दर 2, 4, 5 वर्षाला दुरुस्त करावा लागतो किंवा माणसं बांध फोडतात मग त्याच्यावरून वाद निर्माण होतो. म्हणजे इट इज द मॅन हू मेक बाउंड्रीज अँड इट इज द मॅन हू ब्रेक इट. खरं तर बाउंड्रीज निर्माण कोण करतं? मनुष्यच करतं. आणि त्या बाउंड्रीज नष्ट सुद्धा कोण करतं? मनुष्यच करतं. Means at the surface level, though it seems that the poem is about the wall between two farmers, that is the speaker of the poem and his neighbor, these boundaries are not only the boundaries of a certain farm, but it performs different kinds of roles in the human society. Because these boundaries are the boundaries of religion, the boundaries of caste, creed, and even our thoughts also. So I have told you to read out the whole poem so that you can get an idea of what is this poem about. Then here the poet wants to suggest that the wall serves both to separate and to join two neighbors. खरं तर याच्यातले जे नेबर्स आहेत म्हणजे एक स्पीकर आहे, कवी स्वतः आहे आणि दुसरा त्याचा शेजारी आहे. या दोघांच्या शेतामध्ये एक भिंत आहे बांधलेली आणि ती थोडी पडलेली आहे भिंत. ती दुरुस्ती करण्याच्या लेवलला आलेली आहे. आता स्पीकर हॅज द डिफरंट ओपिनियन अँड द नेबर हॅज द डिफरंट ओपिनियन. हिअर द स्पीकर रिप्रेझेंट्स द मॉडर्निटी or the man who has the modern thoughts. He wants to break that wall because he feels that there is no need to construct such a wall between these two farms. But the neighbor does not agree with him. On the other hand, the neighbor wants to reconstruct that wall or to mend that wall because according to his neighbor, wall improves our relationships, and according to the speaker, it is the wall which can injure our harmonious relationships. Totally the poem is about the wall, but this wall is not a wall of bricks, but it is the symbolic wall. So we have to read out the whole poem, and after reading the whole poem we are going to make its analysis neatly. त्यामुळे सर्व विद्यार्थ्यांनी सर्वप्रथम कविता वाचा. त्या कवितेच्या अगोदर कवितेचे काही प्रकार तुम्हाला दिलेले आहेत ते वाचन करा आणि ते वाचल्यानंतर मग आपल्याला ही कविता तशी इट इज नॉट इझी टू अंडरस्टँड. इझी टू अंडरस्टँड का नाही तर बिकॉज ऑफ द फिलॉसॉफी, बिकॉज ऑफ द थॉट्स प्रेझेंटेड इन द पोएम. At the surface level, it seems that the poem is about wall, but the poem is talking about some other things related to humanity at large. Because Robert's first thoughts are applicable to the whole universe, to the whole humankind of this universe. So, at first, we have to understand that Robert Frost is an American poet. He has his own philosophy. He has his own thoughts regarding the composition and the thoughts prevailed in the poetry. And the present poem, which is a world famous poem, through this poetry or through this poem, Robert Frost wants to suggest a message which is hidden and we have to find it out. In the next lecture, we are going to see the interpretation of this poem. So at first read this poem and then try to make the analysis. I will explain the whole poem in the next lecture. Okay.